I've been playing Monster Hunter since the first game, and played the majority of them ever since, give or take a few. And I've always loved the design of all the monsters and how creative they were. Granted, I could tell several of them were just larger, more roided up versions of normal animals, but some were based or at least partly inspired by creatures of legend and myth. So after hours of thorough research, I believe I've found 10 Monster Hunter monsters based off mythology. Granted, some of these are more obvious than others, and some might just be a far stretch. These aren't in any specific order, so let's see what we got. Number 10. The Kieran. The Kieran is a creature from Asian mythology, usually described as having a body of a horse or a deer covered in fish-like scales, with the head of a horse or sometimes a dragon, with 1 or 2 horns. So the Kieran from Monster Hunter is quite similar to the myth, although the myth is known to be an omen of great events, while the Monster Hunter Kieran is more of an omen to equip your thunderproof mantle. Number 9. The Rajak. The Rajak is a muscular primate with great speed and agility, with the power of a Super Saiyan. It's actually called Rage Mode, but let's be honest, we all call it going Super Saiyan, which is where the connection to mythology actually is. Both Goku from Dragon Ball and the Rajak are both based off the same mythological character, the Chinese legend of the Monkey King, Sun Wukong. Granted, a far more primal version, with less magical powers, but with the shiny golden hair and the ability to shoot lasers, it's not too far off. Number 8. Kulv Tarov. The Kulv Tarov is a giant cave-dwelling dragon coated in gold.
I love gold!
2 myths come to mind when I think of this monster. With the long flowing robe-like gold, along with the curved ram-like horns, they're quite reminiscent of the legendary Golden Fleece from Greek mythology. That part's the more visual-like. The other myth is the legend of Fafnir. In Norse mythology, a dwarf named Fafnir slew his father to obtain his gold, which was cursed, which caused Fafnir's greed to take physical form, turning him into a giant dragon. And in this form, he would be more effective to protect his treasure from anyone who tried to take it. And in this myth may be the basis for the legend of dragons guarding their treasure. Number 7. The Otter Garron. Despite having colourful nicknames like Meat Puppy and Clifford the Big Red Dog, the Otter Garron is more likely based off a weasel, specifically the Japanese Kamaitachi, meaning the sickle weasel. It's a strange weasel spirit with razor-sharp sickles instead of hands and feet. The similarities of the Otter Garron to the Kamaitachi might not be noticeable at first glance, but taking a second look, there's a lot more noticeable things, such as the body type being closer to the mustelid family compared to the canine, and the tail being more longer and thicker. And most obvious, the claws, which a weasel would use for grabbing, where a dog uses its claws for... yeah. Instead of normal claws, the Otter Garron has 2 layers of freakishly long and sharp mamma jammas per hand, which is a pretty decent replacement for sickles. But for more details on the Otter Garron to Kamaitachi comparison, I highly recommend Gaijin Gumba's video on the subject, which is a link in the description below. Number 6. The Dallydonut. Where other monsters on this list have something specific or subtle to connect them to something in mythology, the Dallydonut is actually too vague to really narrow down, specifically any giant snake or serpentine creature, and there's plenty to choose from. Jormungandr, Nidhogg, Apophis, Quetzalcoatl, Ouroboros, Cetus, Leviathan, Seps, Ogopogo, and other such creatures. Simply put, it's a giant mythical serpent, and the biggest monster in the entire series. Big enough that when an actual full-grown sized Dallydonut dies, it's big enough to be an entire zone in Monster Hunter world. Number 5 and 4. Lunastra and Teostra. When I first saw Lunastra and Teostra, I knew there must have been something mythical about them. The most obvious thing about these two is their leonine features. So 2 creatures from mythology with similar features are the Sphinx and the Chimera. Both creatures are a mashup of multiple animals. The Chimera can be a fusion of pretty much anything, but its most well-known form is a lion, a goat, and a dragon, which the dragon part would explain its immense fire powers, and the goat would explain its large horns. As for the Sphinx, it's described to be a fusion of a lion, a bird, and a human, which would explain Teostra's and Lunastra's regal standing. You know, that sort of smug pose they give, like they think they're better than you, which is quite common in humans, and cats, and some birds. But there was something I still felt that I've seen before, and then it hit me. Granted, it's a bit of a stretch, but I think they might be connected to the Chinese lion statues, known as the Fu Lions. There were stone carvings to depict lions, because lions were seen as talismans to protect against evil spirits and demons. They were often placed either side of important buildings, so they were usually made in pairs, and often made as male and female, which would explain why they were both genders of the same creature, which isn't too common in Monster Hunter games, and Lunastra and Teostra are the only elder dragons which have been paired off like that. Number 3. The Najarala. The Najarala, known as the winged snake wyvern, has a large serpentine body, small limbs, a beaked mouth, and large multicoloured scale plumage on its upper back and tail, with which together have heavy similarities to their Aztec serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, which has been known to have several descriptions, sometimes seen as a man, and sometimes seen as a giant snake with feathers and a beaked mouth. Granted, the Najarala doesn't have feathers, but does have the large coloured scales. Seeing the similarities are too obvious to ignore. Number 2. The Zenogre. The Thunderwolf wyvern, Zenogre, is based off the Japanese creature, the Raiju, which is described as a blue and white wolf surrounded by lightning. The Raiju is the pet of the lightning god Raijin. Another reference to Raiju can be seen as the Pokemon Manectric, who also looks very similar to Zenogre, with its blue fur and yellow spikes. Zenogre may also be a reference to another myth, probably not during creation, but more of a jumping off point for another monster, as its myth requires another canine creature, which we'll get to next. Number 1. The Mizutsune. The Mizutsune has always been one of my favourite monsters from the series, due to its unique look, its unusual powers, and its kick-ass battle music, but there was always something about Mizutsune that had to be based off something, other than the more obvious base of Kitsune, a Japanese fox spirit, which I didn't find anything of it having any magical bubble powers. Granted, it's known to be a trickster spirit. I can assume one of its main tricks wasn't tripping people up with soap. So with a deeper look, I still couldn't find anything about bubbles, soap, flour, or dragons, despite countless hours of research into Bubble Bobble.
Fucking bubble!
I came up with nothing, until I thought more about the soap. Not meaning to sound like the kind of person who likes modern art, but thinking of the soap to be more of a metaphor for slippery or hard to grasp or hold, until I came across the legend of the Tiomisian fox, a large fox sent by the gods to attack the children of Thebes. The Tiomisian fox was destined never to be caught, as slippery as wet soap one might say, so to kill the fox they sent Lelaps, a magical hound that never failed to catch whatever it hunted, and in which Monster Hunter used Zenogre as reference to Lelaps. These two began a paradox, a dog who always caught its prey, versus a fox that could never be caught, to which Zeus turned them both into stone and cast them into the stars, becoming the constellations Canis Major and Canis Minor. Now is this all probably just a stretched theory? Yeah, probably, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it.